Hello. Welcome to our September 2016 monthly town call, How Do We Respond? Does My Company Sound LGBT? My name is Daniel Lawrence Smith, Director of Education Strategy at Out and Equal Workplace Advocates. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this recording. This is a recording and not a live session. And with that, we're going to go ahead and move over to our panelists, and I'll allow them to each introduce themselves.
Hello, everybody.
Hi,
this is Bob Witeck at Witeck Communications here in Washington, D.C., proud advocate, ally, and communications expert in LGBT marketing. I'm very happy to be with you all today.
Thanks, Daniel. And this is Pat Bailey, Director of Training at Out and Equal, and we'll be talking about a lot of key topics that come up with questions when we were asked about training in companies. So we hope it will answer many of your questions today.
Let's talk about our agenda. The excitement I have in my work is knowing that for an LGBT community, we have come out of the shadows, out of the so-called commercial closets, and into the public life in America. Companies get us, and they understand that we are not simply co-workers or colleagues, but we're also consumers. My work in the past 25 years has been helping provide a context and a strategy and also confidence to marketers to understand the very positive and important work they can do by truly engaging through positive marketing to the LGBTQ community. So in this conversation, I'm going to go through actually a fairly chronological timeline to get us to a place where we understand where we are and where we're going. But you can't know any of that until we talk about where we've been. So the things I want to talk about today is a little bit of history of workplace visibility perspective. Are we seeing a backlash with current ones? What have you seen as positive responses by corporations to local laws and events like Orlando? Those are questions we're going to raise. Positive marketing, and then how does the company get there? So that we can talk about CSR opportunities for companies and how can they be as inclusive as possible. And, of course, answer questions and be responsive. There we go. I'm going to jump right in and give the history first and talk about where we've come from. There we go. When companies began entering the market, and this goes back almost 20, 25 years in my experience, and this is pre-internet, of course, so we didn't quickly have digital imagery and viral messaging. But what we saw were that marketing conversations were primarily about us. They weren't really intended to be anything except for descriptive, and they were very safe conversations. Brands avoided politics, broadly speaking, because they preferred to support causes. HIV and AIDS became a very important channel by which to indirectly connect with LGBTQ people, but primarily gay men, primarily gay white men. And brands spoke exclusively, but not inclusively, to LGBT audiences. Gay men were the soup of the day, and unfortunately, lesbians, bisexuals, and transgender people were mostly outsiders looking in. But brands are worried then about the risk and reward ratio. They thought of it as more often about risk than certainly about reward, and offense was a key issue. A lot of brands were not at the time even investing that much in consumer or market research and didn't understand it, but they always understood if they got letters, phone calls, and objections. And so there was a lot of tentativeness, a lot of vagueness. One of the good marketers in our audience invented the term gay vague as a way to address LGBT people frankly and openly, but not say the word gay or LGBT. And that you can see, even though Subaru was down the road, so to speak, early in the marketplace, they would do it in so many coded ways as well. Different drivers, different roads, one car. And notice the license plates would be indicators when they say Xena Lover, or they'd have slip in an HRC equality sign. HIV and AIDS were primarily a powerful way of connecting with audiences, and so they were the channels that brands would show their compassion, empathy for gay people, but without specifically thinking about us more universally or more holistically. Pardon me. So let's look a little down the road and the conversations that companies began to have with us. Now, over time, their confidence began to rise, and they realized that now they needed to include all of us, and they began to recognize that we were a variety of genders and backgrounds and attractions. They turned to more and more all forms of media. The internet created tremendous opportunities for online engagement. It actually was far more targeted. And they would seek reward and fear risk a lot less. You would see examples of open displays of affection. In the earlier examples, if you're in a bar, guys would be in a bar, and if you took out the context, you could assume they're just guys in a bar. But now, all of a sudden, you could wrap an arm around a person of the same sex or hold their hand. You could be on the street where you live, walking down the street. And what they began to do is have more fun, have more humor, and have more honesty. And also, brands began to be emboldened enough to take on civil rights. When Banana Republic puts out its apparel in the shape of a updated HRC Human Rights Campaign logo, it's making a political statement as much as it's making a brand promise. So throughout this whole generation of change is conversations in which they actually were reaching us who we are and how we live. We were seeing over and over again that the proportion of ads, as you can see too, were still favoring gays, but gays and others were beginning to, and other people, LGBT people, were being involved in the storytelling. But they also had more research. Brands understood that millennials and younger generations are among the most gay, accepting, and inclusive. In fact, their research told them again and again that non-inclusive portrayals were dishonest. They had a compulsion and a need, an obligation, in effect, to be honest with the audience and make sure that depictions were truthful. That's only propelled us into more and more images. But then, more recently, too, we're discovering that the conversations they have with us are now ones that matter more. Brands are joining the dialogue on cause-related messaging. It gets better campaigns, and love is love. As we were beginning, pardon me, as we were beginning a campaign recognizing, honoring, and supporting same-sex relationships and certainly marriage equality, love is love began to grow as an idea that companies could wrap their heads around, and they could speak to it in a variety of different ways. And they used all forms of social media to do that. What we're seeing more and more is that companies are eschewing formal advertising campaigns, and instead they're using Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube, all the other channels that are available to them to speak to audiences directly and personally, and also using user-generated content so that they don't have to create it all. They're getting third parties to create content and use that as an implied endorsement. More importantly, though, I think, too, is when brands bring their CEO voices to the front. More and more, we don't have enough Tim Cooks in the world, who is the CEO of Apple. But Tim is not alone. Other major CEOs today across the board, from Arne Sorensen at Marriott or Mark Benioff at Salesforce and others, are very vocal champions. Howard Schultz at Starbucks, of being part of the story. They're bringing their voices and their brand to the story as business leaders and as marketers. And also we're discovering, again, interestingly, I think, too, is you think back to the days when Subaru began, especially marketing to women and lesbian and bisexual women. Martina Navratilova, it was the very first time in her long and storied career as a global sports figure to actually have an endorsement. And today, repeatedly, celebrity spokespersons and celebrities are being sought after by major marketers to speak for their brands. When you have Neil Patrick Harris, of course, and Ellen DeGeneres, and so many more willing, able, and interested in doing it, including transgender athletes with Nike. Being able to be the voice of that brand and being the trusted voice of that brand. Never worrying for a moment in 2016 that that's going to shy you away from audiences, when in fact what it does is it grows you more audience share today. But very importantly too, and I want to talk a little bit more about it, is the voice that brands are giving to public policy. In the last 2 years to 4 years, as we've been battling in state legislatures and in ballot measures, companies are emboldened to both take the position in support of marriage equality, but today, now that marriage equality is a law of the land, to battle back against anti-LGBT discrimination. Brands see this, the business case for doing so makes it much simpler, or at least, let's put it this way, much more advisable for them to stand on the side of a pro-business position and oppose discrimination. They see strength in numbers. Too, they have competitive pressure in certain industries. They're finding that all their competitors are out there taking those positions, and they see it as a positive in their business because it actually does give younger consumers an opportunity to support the brands that support the community. And that's a huge difference from 25 years ago, as you can imagine. But it's the conversations that lead that have changed, and this is the future. Brands are bolder, that they're choosing our side because they see it's the side of business future. They're joining forces, forming coalitions. They go to the public square. They're going to court with us at times. They're endorsing and opposing, and they're going global, which is the biggest issue of all, because no matter how much the battles remain in the United States, brands know that their story and their brand doesn't stay on U.S. shores. All of the brands that all of us work with today are ones that are trying to tell a global story that challenges cultural attitudes around the world. Doesn't do battle with norms or international laws that they're powerless to change, but it does affect the notion of acceptance and visibility in a positive way. Even in cultures that are not so accepting, they have been at least universally open about their policies in places like the United States and Europe, which I think have a deeply resonant effect with younger generations around the world. We are seeing evidence of that in Asia. We're certainly seeing evidence of that in parts of Southern Africa as well. Latin America is catching up rather quickly, and both in a political and market sense, using the model that the United States has with companies leading the way to support change. So in all those ways, companies have come way out of the shadows, way out of the closet, and way into the public square to be as, what I would say, is to make a strong business case that holistically thinks of their market as not simply consumers, but also fellow citizens, and that these are issues that they can embrace with confidence. And I would say that arguably with approbation from the public through all the barometers, all their attitude checks, is that they get endorsement from their consumers and from their shareholders. So I want to leave it at that for the moment, I think, Pat and Daniel, and try to give you a sense, I think, in the next round. I want to show where, interestingly to me at least, storytelling is going. Television has always been the one of the most important tools that we have as marketers to tell a story of people, to put the human face on our stories. And there are three brands that are pretty all-American in every sense of the word, and almost iconic brands. One newer than the other two, but two of them are brands that we all grew up with as kids. And yet, they have a way of telling and framing a story that's inclusive, that also is very, very reassuring, because what it really speaks to is enduring values of tradition, the notion of family as a safe place where you raise your kids, and you can be like any other house on the block. So the first one I want to show is the Campbell soup, which I think sort of hit it out of the box with a great idea of family life in 21st century America.
Dun 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 dun. Cooper, I am your father.
No, no, no. I am your father.
That's gotta be the worst Vader ever.
Campbell's Star Wars Soups.
How about you be Chewbacca?
Made for real life.
I think that's the payoff line right there, made for real life. When you see that, you are really realizing is that could be any family in America. And the good news with this production and many others that we've seen are based on real families and real stories, because I think advertising has turned a corner where paid advertising or paid model spokespersons are not as convincing. We expect the pitch or the background to be people we might know, and they don't look like they were out of central casting. They were not perfection. When you looked at those earlier beer spots, print ads, they're clearly models that could have been appeared in almost any apparel ad or the other beer ad. But today, now we're finding real families with real narratives. The next one I think is fascinating, and I think it has its own amazing history. The Amazon Kindle Paperwhite ad, I think, made history for two reasons, or at least two reasons. I believe it may be the first television spot ever produced that actually referred to same-sex couples as characters. And in fact, when this ad first appeared, it had no announcement. Amazon did not come out and explain what they were about to do. They just merely aired it. And this is an ad that appeared on Fox's American Idol. It appeared on Spike Television. It appeared in places that normally broadcasters or marketers wouldn't find comfort, because they thought they would find maybe a hostile audience seeing a couple portrayed in this fashion. But I think it speaks for itself. I think it's great to give it a watch.
That's a Kindle, right?
Yeah, it's a new Kindle Paperwhite.
I love to read at the beach, but
This is perfect at the beach. And with the built-in light, I can read anywhere, anytime.
done.
With your book?
Nope. I just bought a Kindle Paperwhite. We should celebrate.
My husband's bringing me a drink right now.
So's mine.
To me, this extraordinary little vignette is revolutionary simply because it's not so revolutionary. It's what I always call the act of being caught being yourselves. These are conversations that I think gay couples and gay people, LGBTQ people broadly speaking, have every day. When they're speaking of relationships, they're speaking of their family, and all of a sudden you go through this scenario and you play it out every day. How do you say this? How do you do this? And obviously normalizing that conversation is in so many ways both a political reality and opportunity, but it's also affirming and normal. I just was returning from Europe in a big line, and my husband and I got separated in a customs line, and I said, I need to be with him. And this fellow said, why? And I said, well, he's my husband. And two people looked at me and went, husband? I said, yes. And then they nodded. I thought it never occurred to me not to explain that we were married. And you realize that you have a moment in time all the time to explain to people who we are and be caught in the act of being yourself. But Amazon did that, I think, in such a beautifully easy way and in such an attractive way that I thought it earns a lot of merit. Now, this last one is one that's crossed over in terms of, I think, rewards of all kinds, because Wells Fargo, well known for its progressive attitudes and policies and leadership, also had a chance to do a few more things with this spot, and those who are familiar with it will enjoy it one more time. But I like to use it because it is a real family again, and it's intersectional, like a bunch of the work that all of us do, is reminding ourselves that we're not in an isolated pocket of just gay people, but also we're dealing with issues of things like adoption, multicultural families, a lot of other things that needs that contemporary families have. And but again, it's such a universal story that it was so compelling. And when Wells Fargo did it, they did it picture perfect and note perfect. So let's take a look.
Everyone works hard for a reason. Working together, we can help you prepare financially for when 2 becomes 3. Wells Fargo. Together we'll go far.
The thing that when advertising really soars is when it reveals the truth about something. And in this instance, I think it's just an extraordinary opportunity to pull out a real story out of people's lives and share it. I also love the fact that, of course, it's wordless. So it forces us to really pay attention. The music and the images pull us in. So huge kudos to Wells Fargo for being a leader in storytelling and everything else, a kudo that they richly need at the moment. And I think they deserve credit. So often, despite all the strategies we put together, the marketers do is certainly they invest. By the time Pride season comes along, they have full-fledged budgets, campaigns, action, activations in the marketplace to have a presence all throughout, usually the summer and fall, for LGBTQ consumers. But nonetheless, we have events arise, like the tragedy in this past June in Orlando, or we have other places where we find ourselves at barricades, or we find ourselves with challenges. Corporations are far more committed, dedicated to making sure that they are nimble enough to respond to those. Orlando's an interesting one because Orlando showed us many things. It showed us intersections again. It wasn't just an LGBTQ tragedy, it was certainly a Latino. It was an urban tragedy, violence in cities that we're witnessing. So it kind of connected a lot of audiences in a lot of different ways. But companies were really quick to jump in to help. And so many did so in amazingly generous ways. But also, with the ones especially I was talking to, they're very concerned about making it not so much about their actions, because they also didn't want to tip the balance in terms of exploitation, commercializing, or intending to grandstand when the community's emotions were so raw. And so there was a lot of balancing acts, a lot of nimbleness about what to say, how to say it, how quickly to say it, and in what form to say it. The good news is most of them did it generally through their philanthropy. They ended up pulling they pulled some of their campaigns, some of their advertising. They went dark for a spell, and then they simply allowed the voice of community people and their associates play that role. They communicated their grief. But they also showed it through their actions, which I think is more important. But those are lessons I think they can learn from the general market. They're not issues or needs that LGBTQ people have specifically. But during Orlando, I think there was such an extraordinary outpouring. It reminded marketers and brands, too, how interconnected we are. The grief was so compelling and so very tangible that it did just caused a tremendous ripple across every company. And also, I remember many marketers were getting those calls from their own associates. What are we going to say? What are we going to do? Those are conversations that didn't happen maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Well, let's take another look, too. How do companies get there? How does a company get there? What steps can be taken that help increase corporate responsibility? So even though you're in the market, how does that market presence manifest itself in more community engagement? Now, there's a lot of ways of thinking about that, but one of the things that I've noticed, at least observed, that companies do is really do community outreach, making sure that they are connected with the communities they serve. Are they talking with, advocating for community organizations? I've looked through a lot of annual reports and brag books. You know, when a company says, look at all the great things we do. Here's what we do in the community of color. Here's what we do for mental health. Here's what we do for, and then I tried to look, 20 years ago, did they even mention gay people at all? And almost to an individual, none of them did, because they just didn't think of it as a page in their engagement. So that's changed clearly, and they're doing it because they have authentic connections with the community and outreach that's based on, a lot of times, the great work that Out and Equal has been doing, creating the voice of ERGs. The employee and associate resource groups are the conscience and blood and brains and volunteer equity of associates and colleagues who are reminding them that these are causes we care about. These are the places where we volunteer our time. This is where we help in our community. But also advocacy is a lot easier now. What we're knowing is that companies do give back. They want to do, and not just in their United Way programs, but also to actually support with even sometimes dollar per dollar matches with employees. And employees now, of course, are willing, able, and eager to tell them which organizations they support. So they want to make sure that you're going to sign up for those. That didn't happen so long ago. But volunteerism is where I think corporate employees make such a big difference, because nonprofits in our community have always been woefully underserved by expertise. They need help in finance. They need help in marketing. They need help in human relations, human resources, technology. A lot of the tools that we take for granted in our workplaces are exactly those gaps that exist in many, many nonprofits. They just don't have the business savvy or cred to get the job done. And as we always say, I remember years ago, Elizabeth Birch, beloved Elizabeth Birch, when she came as general counsel to Apple into run the Human Rights Campaign, she always said, I want to make Apple more like the Human Rights Campaign. I want to make the Human Rights Campaign more like Apple. And I think that is our goal, is to try to make sure that corporations see themselves mirrored in the business-like styles and attitudes and good practices that nonprofits should emulate. Funding, of course, I brought that up because that's the lifeblood of nonprofits. But in the public policy side is the other final frontier where companies can take that. I'm gonna run down that list here, because these are the areas where I know that we can make a difference, and the companies are making a difference in doing all of these things. Some of them have grown out of our ERGs, as I mentioned, but some also because more and more executives in companies have a mandate to participate in the community's leadership. They have got to bring their talents into community in ways that are meaningful and lasting. They're mentoring groups, they're mentoring their own ERGs, and they're also showing career paths for people growing through their companies. But also, they're showing the match between their policies and practices and public policy. So when we have a non-discrimination or an anti-discrimination measure, it's easier to make the business case. Why is this bad for a company that's trying to recruit talent, diverse talent that from all over, when we have a policy in our community or in our state that says that they're not, the individuals aren't welcome? And that's a thing where that's a sea change where companies are made a difference, because they are recognizing is that if they're going to commit to growing talent in serving their shareholders, they have got to have as robust and open and diverse campus of talent as possible. And I think those are pretty good touchstones for us to think about things we can do. Daniel and Pat, do you have anything to add from those?
Well, and this is Pat, and I know one of the areas that we've seen, we get a lot of questions about how do we develop these ERGs, and so much of it now doesn't go through that. Let's have a social group, let's get together just to bring the LGBT employees and then bring in the allies. It almost seems to go directly to how is this going to increase the business. And I know in some of the ads that you were showing and talking about is that it's good to see that companies are using that employee resource group as a resource to review that, because I know we'll get scripts or we'll get an outtake that says, take a look at this. Are we saying the right things? Are we using the right words? So there's also that increased consciousness about not only do we think we know the path forward, but let's make sure we do it right, because I think companies are definitely wanting to not be on the wrong side of terminology and concepts and supporting, D&I kind of operations and work.
You make one great point there too. There's the difference. I think when ERGs began to form, a lot of companies imagine them, first of all, a little anxious, because whenever there's organizing on a corporation, you want to make sure it's for good purposes, and you want to make sure it's business objectives or focus. But that was the beginning. Was these are good things because they raise morale. But today a company views them more as an asset to grow business. They see them as actually spokespersons, ambassadors, and actually marketers themselves, because if they are confident in their brand and they can express it, they are actually the voices of the company in all communities. And to me, that's a huge difference. There was a time they were afraid of that independence, and now they want to harness it.
And I think it lends that credibility to the consumer to say, what's a company doing, and are you involved? Because again, some of the early marketing, you could tell when there was no one who was LGBT that influenced it. But if a company is really involved and engaged, then those employees are promoting that. I mean, Wells Fargo did an amazing job of getting that commercial out to the community, and everybody still cries every time they see it.
That's true.
Yeah,
Anything
and I think
else
with that, when you think of the brand loyalty aspect, just to see LGBT people reflected within those marketing campaigns is definitely not something which I was accustomed to growing up. So I think it's a new avenue for all of us, and certainly when we see that, that's going to make us that much more vested to those companies.
You have it right. I've used this anecdote before. I'm old enough to tell you all this, but in the 50s and early 60s, black folks didn't appear much on television, and there were anecdotes that say in the early days of television, if you were in a community of color, like in New York City, and Nat King Cole or Lena Horne might appear, they would yell down the block to turn to a certain channel to find it because it was an unusual event. Gay people were the same way for a lot of years. When they first started appearing, it was like destination television. You had to tune in and make sure you recorded it or saw it. And today, of course, we're background noise in all communities in all life, and you don't need ballyhoo anymore. You just have to need honesty.
Absolutely, and I think from a workplace perspective, we talked about from a consumer perspective, but when we think about it from a workplace perspective, this is also going to have a huge influence on employee retention, and that impacts the company's bottom line.
Big time, especially when a company looks at the cost of finding, recruiting, retaining, and getting a new employee, new talent. It just do the numbers, and they begin to understand that. I think that would bring us to our end. I don't have anything else to add, but if obviously I want to welcome questions and certainly respond to them if they come.
Well, we want to thank you so much, Bob, for your time today and sharing all of your key insights and wisdom. As always, it's a pleasure to have you on the call, and we really appreciate your participation. And we want to thank all of you for listening in and taking the time to view this recording. If you do have questions, certainly reach out to either Pat Bailey or myself with the contact information listed above, and we will also make sure that you have a way to reach out with Bob if you are interested in contacting him. Again, thank you all for your time today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.